What happens when a movie stops trying to entertain and instead tries to shock you into silence? The 70s became the decade filmmakers tested the limits of violence, dread, and human cruelty. Some films became banned, others became legends, and all of them went way too far. Today we count down 15 70s exploitation films that push cinema past the breaking point. Number 15, I Drink Your Blood, 1971. I Drink Your Blood was a small, rough grindhouse shocker that exploded through drive and screens like a rabid animal. On the surface, it looked like another low-budget horror film, but inside it carried something darker. The story follows a pack of cult members who become infected with rabies after a local boy decides to get revenge. That setup alone was enough to horrify audiences because rabies was a real-world fear, and the film leaned into every possible nightmare. The infected cultists descend into madness, tearing through the town in a frenzy of violence, gore, and brutality. This was one of the first films in the United States ever to receive an X rating purely for violence. Not sex, not subject matter. Violence alone. The film was so shocking, theaters demanded cuts before showing it. Others refused to screen it entirely. Critics dismissed it as sick trash, while audiences whispered about how far it went. The chaos behind the scenes only added to the legend because the cast performed dangerous stunts with no real safety. Actors were injured, animals panicked, and the grindhouse production pushed everyone to the edge. Today the film is remembered as one of the earliest examples of 70s exploitation going too far. It crossed the line and then sprinted beyond it. Number 14, Gurly, also known as Mumsy, Nanny Sani, and Gurly, 1970. Gurly is one of the strangest exploitation films of its decade because it weaponized innocence. The movie centers on a twisted, wealthy family who lure strangers into their mansion, then force them to play childish games before killing them. At a time when most horror relied on monsters and slashers, Gurly created terror from psychological manipulation and emotional decay. The cheerful childish tone mixed with sadistic violence disturbed viewers because it broke the boundary between innocence and cruelty. Critics did not know what to make of it. Some thought it was satire. Some believed it was depravity wrapped in fairy tale colors. The censorship boards were especially uncomfortable with how the film mixed playful aesthetics with brutal outcomes. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was intense because the director wanted performances that felt unstable, unpredictable, and mentally frayed. The result was a film that made audiences feel trapped, confused, and horrified without relying on gore alone. Gurly is now considered a cult oddity, but in its time, it went far enough to unsettle even hardened exploitation fans. It proved that horror did not need blood to be disturbing. It only needed a twisted idea carried to its extreme end. Number 13, Satan's Cheerleaders, 1977. Satan's Cheerleaders sounds like harmless drive and fun, but underneath its title lies a sleazy supernatural exploitation film that pushed boundaries in all directions. The plot follows a group of high school cheerleaders kidnapped by a satanic cult and forced into rituals that mix sexuality, violence, and occult imagery. In the 70s, satanic panic had already begun festering in public imagination, and this movie poured gasoline on it. Critics blasted the film for exploiting teenage sexuality, religious fear, and graphic ritual elements. Nothing about it aimed for subtlety. Everything was designed to provoke reactions. Even the production was chaotic. Sets were reused from other films, actors were given little preparation, and improvisation created scenes more unhinged than scripted. Several countries demanded cuts, while others delayed releases because the film blurred the line between horror and softcore exploitation. Satan's Cheerleaders became infamous not because it was good, but because it was shameless. It crossed every boundary of taste to shock audiences, and that willingness to go as far as possible turned it into a legendary piece of 70s exploitation cinema. Number 12, Terminal Island, 1973. Terminal Island offered a nightmare vision of America. In the film, future criminals are sent to an island with no guards, no rules, and no escape. Society abandons them, and what happens next becomes pure savage chaos. Violence, enslavement, rebellion, and primal survival dominate the story. For audiences in the early 70s, the brutality was overwhelming. The film reflected real-world frustrations with government punishment and social collapse. But it did so using the raw, unfiltered style of exploitation cinema. Women are targeted, Power struggles turn bloody. Morality dissolves into tribal warfare. Critics called it too extreme, too nihilistic, and too chaotic. But that reputation is exactly why it endured. Behind the scenes, the production was intense. Action scenes were filmed with dangerous stunts, minimal safety oversight, and improvised choreography that left injuries on set. The film's harsh portrayal of human degradation caused some theaters to drop it after test screenings. Others embraced it as the kind of film that pushed exploitation to its limits. Terminal Island is not just violent. It is deeply uncomfortable because it shows how quickly humanity collapses when nothing remains but instinct. That was the 70s at its boldest and its most brutal. Number 11, Coffy, 1973. Coffy was more than blaxploitation. It was a firestorm. Pam Grier plays a woman who turns into a vigilante to destroy the drug dealers who ruined her family. The violence is fierce. The revenge is relentless. The sexuality is bold. And the message is raw. While many mainstream films tiptoed around race crime and corruption, Coffy charged into these topics with no filter. Audiences were shocked by the graphic confrontations between Coffy and the criminal underworld. The film featured sudden, brutal fights, explicit revenge scenes, and the kind of street-level violence Hollywood tried to avoid. Critics accused it of glamorizing vigilantism, but they also admitted Pam Grier's performance commanded the screen with unstoppable power. Behind the scenes, the stunts were dangerous and often done without doubles or proper protection, because exploitation budgets were small and expectations were high. Coffy pushed the boundaries of what female-led action could be in the 70s, and it terrified studios that were not ready for such intensity. The result was a movie that felt explosive, raw, and unrestrained. Coffy went too far by 70s standards, and that is exactly why it remains iconic. Number 10, Foxy Brown, 1974. Foxy Brown was the moment Pam Grier stopped being a rising star and became a force of nature. The 70s were filled with exploitation films, yet none balanced beauty danger and political fire the way this one did. Foxy is a woman pushed past her limits by a world that refuses to protect her. When her boyfriend is murdered, she walks into the criminal underworld with nothing but rage, courage, and a determination to burn the world down if she has to. The violence hits hard because it is presented without gloss. Foxy is beaten, betrayed, and humiliated, yet she gets back up every time, and her revenge is merciless. Audiences in the 70s were stunned because the film refused to make her a background character or a sidekick. She was front and center, driving every moment with fury and fearlessness. Critics did not know how to categorize it. Some claimed it went too far with its depictions of torture, revenge, and sexual exploitation. Others argued that it was one of the few films showing a black woman taking control in a corrupt, violent world. Behind the scenes, the production was fast, cheap, and dangerous. Action sequences were shot on rough streets with little safety oversight. Pam Grier performed most of her own stunts, even when fights turned real and furniture shattered around her. The risk gave the film its raw edge. Scenes involving the villain's drug empire tested censors who believed the violence and sexual content crossed every acceptable line. Yet, the more people tried to suppress it, the more the movie grew into a legend. Foxy Brown is now remembered as a bombshell of revenge cinema. In the 70s, it went too far, yet its willingness to challenge everything is exactly why it stands as one of the decade's defining exploitation films. Number 9, The Driller Killer, 1979. The Driller Killer was not just a horror film, it was an urban scream. Shot in the dirty, bleeding heart of late 70s New York, the movie follows an artist who slowly loses his grip on reality and begins killing strangers with a power drill. The premise alone was enough to unsettle audiences, but the execution was far more disturbing. Unlike the polished slashers that would dominate the 80s, The Driller Killer felt real. Its violence was shot on grimy streets that truly existed. Its victims looked like actual people wandering through the darkness of a collapsing city. There was nothing glamorous, nothing exaggerated, only madness and blood. When the film hit video stores, it ignited public outrage. The VHS cover was so graphic, some stores refused to stock it. In the United Kingdom, the film landed on the infamous video nasty list, where it was banned and blamed for corrupting young viewers. Critics attacked the movie for going too far into sadistic violence and psychological breakdown, yet the controversy only increased its notoriety. Behind the scenes, the production was chaos. The cast was made up of friends, musicians, and struggling artists, many of whom had never acted before. Scenes were shot guerrilla style, with no permits, while homeless residents wandered through the frame. Some sequences were filmed in real abandoned buildings that were dangerous, rotting, and infested. Lead actor and director Abel Ferrara pushed himself into genuine mental exhaustion to capture a believable descent into insanity. Equipment broke, lights failed, tempers erupted, but the result was a film that felt truly unhinged. The Driller Killer went too far for its time because it blurred fiction and reality. It looked like an actual breakdown caught on camera. It treated violence with raw indifference instead of cinematic flair. Today, it remains a disturbing artifact of a city on the edge, and a filmmaker willing to push every boundary to expose the darkness beneath. Number 8. Blood and Lace, 1971. Blood and Lace is one of those 70s films that shocked audiences not with gore, but with its sheer cruelty. The movie takes place inside an orphanage run by two sadistic adults who abuse, manipulate, and terrorize the children in their care. Even in a decade known for brutal cinema, the idea of harming children struck a nerve. Critics and audiences alike recoiled. Many believed the film crossed a moral line by placing vulnerable young characters in constant danger. The film's opening sequence alone pushed boundaries. A home invasion, a murder committed with a hammer, a child traumatized. The blunt violence set a tone that made viewers uneasy from the first minute. As the story progresses, the orphanage becomes a twisted prison where psychological torture takes center stage. The adults use starvation threats, violence, and emotional manipulation to maintain control. Scenes are drawn out with uncomfortable tension, pushing viewers to confront a nightmare that felt too authentic. Behind the scenes, the film was made on a very tight budget, which only increased the intensity. Sets were poorly ventilated, and actors were often forced to work long hours with minimal support. Several cast members later admitted that some scenes involving fear and panic felt overwhelmingly real because they had no time to prepare or decompress. The director pushed for raw, frightened performances, and the young actors delivered them. Censorship boards worldwide were uneasy with the film. While many exploitation movies focused on adults in violent situations, Blood and Lace turned children into victims, which was almost unheard of at the time. Some countries delayed release. Others demanded cuts. The United States gave it a GP rating, initially a mistake that shocked critics because the content was far harsher than most parental guidance films. Blood and Lace became a cult legend precisely because it went too far. It dared to show vulnerability exploited to its limits. It forced audiences to confront abuse without protection or relief. That boldness made it one of the most disturbing entries in 70s exploitation history. Number 7. Pink Flamingos, 1972. Pink Flamingos is perhaps the most notorious midnight movie ever created. It was not designed to entertain. It was designed to shock, disgust, and overwhelm audiences into reacting. Directed by John Waters, the film stars the drag icon Divine in a battle for the title of the filthiest person alive. Everything about the film goes too far, deliberately pushing past social boundaries and moral expectations. The content is extreme. Scenes that test sexual limits. Scenes that push bodily taboos. Moments that exist only to provoke disbelief. In the early 70s, nothing like this had ever appeared on screen. Audiences fainted, gagged, or walked out. Others laughed, screamed, or cheered. Every reaction was loud because the film demanded intensity. It rejected the idea of taste entirely. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic guerrilla filmmaking. Waters and his cast shot in real Baltimore neighborhoods with no permits. Many scenes were improvised based purely on shock value. Divine performed stunts that were not only dangerous but unrepeatable. Cast members lived in makeshift conditions and embraced the filthy, wild tone the director wanted. There were no rules, no boundaries, only chaos. When the film premiered, it caused outrage. Cities banned it outright. Some threatened legal action. Others protested outside theaters. But the more it was censored, the more audiences became curious. Soon, Pink Flamingos became the ultimate underground film. Viewers lined up at midnight screenings, not to enjoy it, but to endure it as a rite of passage. Today, critics view it as a rebellion against cinematic respectability. But in the 70s, it was something far more dangerous. It was a cultural explosion. It went too far happily and proudly. It reveled in being disgusting. and that fearless commitment transformed it into a cornerstone of exploitation cinema. Number 6. Snuff, 1976. Snuff remains one of the most infamous film hoaxes in history, produced as an ordinary low-budget exploitation movie. It was later re-edited with a final scene designed to convince audiences they were watching an actual murder. This marketing stunt pushed the film into territory no exploitation movie had entered. The idea that a real killing had been captured on camera caused national outrage. Newspapers attacked it, politicians condemned it, religious groups demanded bans. The film itself tells the story of a cult inspired by the Manson family. The violence is sloppy, chaotic, and uncomfortably realistic. But the controversy came from the added ending.